Hello, welcome to Monetizing Innovation. I'm John Holcomb, the best-selling author of Creating Value Faster. Today, we're joined by Ray Abaskharon, a dynamic entrepreneur and business leader known for building, scaling, and advising high-growth ventures across multiple industries. Ray has a strong track record of turning ideas into operationally sound, revenue-generating businesses while navigating the realities of leadership, execution, and growth. His perspective blends strategic thinking with real world experience, making him a valuable voice for anyone looking to move from concept to scalable impact. In this episode, we'll explore how Ray approaches growth, decision making under pressure, and what it takes to build a business that lasts. Ray, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for the invite. I'm excited. This is an area and a topic that I think as a community in the life sciences space, we have a lot of work to do on, a lot to improve on. And I'm looking forward to, the conversation here, but also just raising awareness and helping folks recognize some of these traps that we might be walking into.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important, especially like in the life sciences space, right? With all the regulations, there's folks sometimes don't realize that we actually do have quite a bit of latitude, right, to innovate, but there's a certain way we have to, take it to market. And dispelling some of those myths, I think, are hugely important as well.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. There's a lot of restraint in what we industry can do and how we do it. But we also don't want that to limit our judgment, to make us think that there's only a cookie cutter way of doing things that doesn't allow us to cater to the patient, the clinician, the payer at the end who end up being our customers.
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of a great segue into, when you think about the life science teams and the focus on customer behavior, what is some of the work that you've done to really help tie it in from business concept to all the way to the patient?
Yeah. I think for us, some of the ethos and the impetus behind starting Veritas S came out of the fact that as an industry, we do things in very structured ways.
Mm.
Starts at the identification of a disease area. That comes out of epidemiology data. There's a number of people who have the condition, there's a number who are aware of it or diagnosed with it, and there's, a number who end up on treatment. That doesn't really define what the actual need is, the reason why your product needs to be there and be in that market doesn't even tell you which portion of that group it's going to serve. From unmet need identification into the way we structure the clinical trials to show that a medication or a medical device has some type of impact. We don't, we take a very structured approach to those clinical trial designs. And in addition to that, downstream into the commercial organization trying to spread the word, bring these products to people's attention and awareness, we adopted a very structured and rigid approach to market research. Market research actually looks a lot like clinical trial designs, but it's measuring something very squishy. A lot of times in traditional research, it's people's perceptions, what they think, what they ought to do. And that's where customer behavior comes in. Often the behavior doesn't match the perception. And that was the impetus for Veritas. How can we get closer? How can we actually simulate the behavior that will occur? How can we figure out the mechanics of each behavior occurring, right? There's, I often say this, there's 4 elements to any human behavior. If you know those 4 elements, you know how that behavior will occur. Can you find it? Can you identify it? And then can you influence it in a way that helps create better patient outcomes?
I think that's so true. And, I know some folks sometimes talk about voice of the customer, but I think that misses the point on the behavior elements, right? That you're really diving into to help because it's those behaviors, right? That actually means whether or not the patient's going to comply, right, with the treatment program as a basic. And it goes from there.
Exactly. And I think, I hear the term voice of the customer. I actually really like that term. That term sounds more real to me than market research. What is market research? But when we just only give them a voice, I think we might miss the point. Maybe they should have more than a voice. We have to step back, and this is something startups do really well, is that they realize that the customer isn't just a voice in the room. They start to realize when they succeed, they realize that the customer is the authority. It's not their VC, it's not them or the CEO or the founder of the startup. It's the customer. The customer decides if this product is useful. The customer decides how much it's going to be utilized, how it will be utilized. They are the authority in the room, right? And we want to make sure that we are truly understanding each one of those customers, the authority that they have over their individual behaviors, decisions, actions, or inaction, to be able to bring the right perspective to the teams that are trying to reach them.
Absolutely. It's funny. I'm a big proponent of job theory. I think Christensen did a great job really laying that out. And it's very similar to what you're describing here in terms of your approach, right? It's really trying to understand the behaviors, the
Yep.
actions, the needs.
Yeah, and I think that's critical, right? When you look at jobs to be done and the range of behavior that there is, probably about 15, 20 years ago, the life sciences industry really picked up on this notion of patient journey. What are the various behaviors that happen across the entire journey? Whether it's from origination and diagnosis all the way through refilling or being lost to care, we understood that we actually should understand all these processes, right? What we never cracked the code on, and we got a little close before the pandemic. We never cracked the code on how does each one of those behaviors happen. And so before the pandemic, really Kahneman and Tversky's work in behavioral sciences started surfacing and starting getting commercial application, but it still remained in an academic space. A lot of times you'd hear, and maybe you're still hearing this today, is the reports would come back and speak about behavioral heuristics, which are great, but it's very easy to constantly paint physicians in a perspective of they're loss averse. They don't want to make the patient worse. They definitely don't want to do any harm, but they don't want to lose the efficacy of the existing treatment, right? Those heuristics might be a little too generalized, get down to these individual behaviors. And we stepped in and said, similar to jobs to be done, we need to detail this, but we need to detail the right portions of it because our executives in our conference rooms are very busy. There's a lot of thoughts going on through their minds. There's a lot to action on. There's a lot to communicate within their organizations and communicate outside of their walls to customers. How do we cut through that? How do we get straight to the point of the behavior that matters for this particular medication or this particular diagnosis pattern or cycle or process, right? And how do we make sure that when you action, you're actually actioning on something that will change the customer's behavior?
Yeah, I think that's so powerful, right? Because that is giving you a tangible direction that you can really help make sure you're addressing their needs.
That's precisely it. We want to make sure everything is practical, actionable, easy to use, and you know exactly what to do with it.
Absolutely. And when you think about some of the aspects of that as well, what are some of the challenges that you often see as you're helping some of your clients, really bring some of these products to market?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of the times what we're facing today is an environment where you can't have a Me Too product anymore. Now, you could say there are, markets like the GLP-1 markets where a couple follow-up products or lifecycle management plays are there and so on. The thing is that there's a certain point and a certain tolerance for that in the marketplace. And largely we've moved away from it. We're seeing a lot more products coming that don't fit your typical retail pharmacy model. They no longer are a reach and frequency sales detail that you see the promotional response to seeing the rep, every other week instead of every third week. Those things, those models that used to be tried and true aren't there anymore. What we're seeing instead is building out new ways of getting medication. Therapeutic areas that didn't used to have in-office administration now have devices and medications that are being administered in an office or in a healthcare setting, right? We're seeing in other spaces, we're seeing surgeries convert to pharmaceutical treatment, which is a great thing. That's actually what we're aiming to do with medicine. That's a wonderful thing, replacing an invasive surgery with a medication. And we're also seeing that when products come to market, these days, you might need to define the disease or the mechanism of that medicine. How is it working? Why is it working? That becomes key. And those things all play together to eventually point you to the solution. And everything is more tailored at this point. Right. Often people are looking for tried and true. They're trying to find a solution that is validated and works, and they want to be able to make that point to senior management or to their organization as a whole. But they're also working on products that are innovative, new, and cutting edge. And that mismatch, right, is very hard for humans to get over because we're used to saying this is evidence, this is validated, this is the way to do it.
No, that is very true, right? And I think anybody that's made that journey would definitely echo that sentiment with you.
Appreciate it.
It's really interesting too, because I think with your company and the organization that you built, what can life sciences learn from some of the Silicon Valley about engaging customers and launching more effectively? What are some of the lessons that you've observed through that?
Yeah. The first one I would say is that in life sciences, we only have one launch. We cannot be version 26 of Google Chrome browser, right? We cannot iterate overnight, release a new edition, look at the data and say, it was a flop, let's revert. Or, hey, we can improve it this way as well. And we never gave our space and gave ourselves a safe space to iterate that way. Now, Silicon Valley typically can. Whether it's these constant updating of AI models, right? This constant updating of apps, the constant, replacement of hardware devices, right? Apple every year develops a new Apple iPhone, right? They can do that. We can't. But that doesn't mean that we can't have the insights from that. Just because I can't put it in market doesn't mean that we can't go out and validate it before we scale it. What I think a lot of folks have noticed is over the years, market research has been one of many assumptions that go into building a strategy. Often we're finding that as we step back, that the assumptions might be built upon other assumptions and that you're a few degrees removed along these assumptions that might be actually sending you off on the wrong path. And then you launch, it's your one chance to launch. You only make a first impression one time. It doesn't go the way you wanted it to. And then you scramble. What we're hoping, for the clients and the companies that we work with is that they are seeing their opportunities to validate their product and also validate the tactics and the approaches that they're going to use, often in the same project work stream, so that they can be certain, be confident it will make the change, or even be confident in explaining the way that it is changing the market to their senior leadership.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And when you think about that too, I've often found that you need different metrics, right, for where you're at and say a new product or new innovative space versus the mature product that's already out there, and that sometimes gets lost in translation. Could you share a little bit about that from your experience and perspective?
Absolutely. We come across a range of situations, right? And often what we see is that mature products are feeding into certain instincts from their customers that already exist, right? If you've been on market 6 years and you have changed the paradigm of treatment, it is very hard for somebody else to come in and disrupt you. If you know why the instincts were built and how those instincts take hold and form. What we're finding is that a lot of mature companies are missing the fact that their competitor can come in and understand the behavior of their customer and impact it, right? One of the things that is least used with mature products that I would argue should be used in every market event is competitive simulation. I mean, a true simulation, not just like the one that, the war game workshop you do inside your walls, but truly an external simulation, taking your strategy, simulating that with your customer, and also simulating the competitor's strategy with your customer. So we're seeing mature companies, under resource things like that and potentially take on a threat that they're not prepared for. On the newer brands, we're seeing that oftentimes they are launched in the routine processes of the organization they're in. This is what a strategy deck looks like. This is how we define the market using the epidemiology data. And we're basically doing a TAM, SAM, SOM model, right? And this portion of the market is going to get served. And here's our demand and do the multiplication. And that's your forecast. They're using traditional models. They're not seeing the role of AI changing the way that a patient has a conversation with a doctor and the questions it might take them 3 steps ahead of, because the patient feels the pressure in the exam room when the appointment's 10 minutes long. And this is the thing that affects them the most physically every day. And so we're seeing that a lot of new brands, when they launch on some of those assumptions, and they might not hit their expectation the way they thought. Maybe they got close, but there's just something more that the organization desired. And then they come back to, why aren't they doing what they said they were going to do? Well, there's several reasons for that, but it all goes back to, how did you think of the customer and how much authority did you give the customer?
I think that's such a great point, right? Especially if you miss those insights, because you didn't study the behavior well enough, you can miss huge opportunities in the market with your launch. One thing too that is interesting, and I know a lot of the audience understands this, but With pharma having such long development cycles, right? Especially if you think about from inception of molecule to actual final FDA approval and launch. There's a short window to really recoup some of the investment. So I think that actually points to how important this market activity truly is, especially in this space. Could you elaborate on that for us?
Yeah, I think it's important throughout the entire cycle. It's important to get it right when you get to phase three and you know you're coming to market because that's when you're going to start engaging with the broader marketplace. That's obvious to most people. Where I think we miss our opportunities is we say that the product is the product. The mechanism is designed, the epidemiology data told us what our target indication was. We designed the study to fit that indication and that's it, right? It is what it is. There's nothing here to change, tinker with. But we step back and we say, yeah, the molecule might be designed, the pill might be designed, what goes into it might be designed. The label isn't yet. The label is what the product is. The label governs how it's used. The label gives everyone the indicators that they need. Most of your customers, aside from the patient, actually might not touch that retail pharmacy pill. The insurance company may never receive a bottle of it, and the physician probably has never actually physically held the pill. What they're all making the decision on is the label. Well, where's that label designed? Where does it really start? And the point to validate that is actually your phase two clinical trial design. And usually, if you have a meaningful conversation with the clinical team, there's usually a range of decisions they're making in that trial design. Why not take the opportunity to, in 6 weeks, learn what you're going to learn 6 years from now after a phase two, a phase three, commercial launch, and time in the market? In 6 weeks, learn what you can learn now rather than finding it out 6 years from now and not being able to change it. And so that for us is one of the places where I think a lot of teams feel like it's too early, it's too risky, but it's actually the place to validate the design of the product itself. I would much rather learn in phase two that we have a middle of the road product than learn that after we launch in the marketplace, right? How could we allocate resources differently? Or how can we uncover that opportunity that tells us, hey, we need to go advocate for more resources, that this launch should be bigger, that there is a bigger impact to be made here. So that's the first place I think is critical to validate. You flip that, product is validated, you know it fits, you know it's treating and solving a problem. Then you can think about validating the tactics that facilitate access. You can validate the promotional materials that communicate this to the clinician so they could have a robust discussion about it. You can validate the materials that help patients become comfortable with it. Validating those things along the way as well really helps you understand what the solution is, why they need to have it in the positioning, and then how do you actually action on making that come to life.
Absolutely. And one of the things, and you kind of touched on it earlier, but would love to hear your thoughts as well. As AI continues to impact healthcare, sometimes in direct ways, sometimes indirectly, how do you see that unfolding, especially now as we're looking at, I think, especially like you described that entire product development cycle, right? And the launches and things like
Yeah.
that. Where do you think AI will start playing a role in some of this?
It's already started playing a role in a lot of it. We've seen advances in AI discovering, new molecules, new treatments, new ways to think about potentially tackling a disease state. We've also seen it play a role in helping get through a wide range of data. How is your brand talked about online? What are the conversations happening there? What are the questions truly being asked there? What conversations are people having with AI to help facilitate the treatment of the condition, whether it's the clinician or the patient. Inside the walls of pharma, at least from a commercial perspective, I also think it's starting to broaden people's understanding of a range of things that they could do. What could be my strategy? What other options do we have strategically here? How do we keep that in line, right? What we are not seeing it do yet is create predictive information, right? And if that's the place where I think we as an industry need to be careful. It cannot predict what somebody is going to do in the future. If you want to test me, ask it to build a model to help you figure out how to win the lottery. It will tell you it is individual trials that any model it creates will not be better than the probabilistic odds that you have of winning the lottery. The same is true. It cannot predict what customers will say if they have not already said it. Well, if you have a product that is going to change some type of paradigm, create some incremental value that does not currently exist, you still need to do the work. Now, AI can assist, it can help you be more effective, efficient, but it's not going to make your prediction better, right? At least not the versions that we have today. Maybe that'll change in the future. As we look and step back as an organization at Veritas and think about that, we think about, hey, well, where are the places where we drew a line, where we didn't go as far as we would have? And one of the, I'll give a good example of this. We test ad concepts for our clients all the time, making sure, they're going to resonate, they're going to be clear. And it used to be that before the days of AI, we would spend 8-10 minutes talking about each concept. Well, the reason we did that is the concept was a concept of a concept. It was portrayed as a PowerPoint slide with a headline, a subheader, and an image, right? That wasn't the way it was going to live on a website or an ad journal with more text and more ways of a person engaging with it. But we were having this long conversation about something somebody would look at for moments, if not a fraction of a second. And our team said, well, the reason you couldn't do that is because you could not execute on 5, 6, 7 different concepts into the real world. But now we're simulating that with AI. We're able to develop that. We're able to take it a step further and say, so this is what it would look like in a banner ad. Now we could test it as a banner ad quickly, and we can test it as an exhibit booth at a conference quickly and get more realistic answers. Now, what happened was AI didn't develop the prediction. AI helped us develop more and better stimuli quicker so we could have a better simulation. And so, that's a good example of a place where AI can supplement and assist rather than us giving it to the keys to the car.
No, absolutely. And I think that human element, right, is so important, because it's that critical thought and insight that we're directing the model or training the model how to actually process. And it can process a lot faster, but we still have to do the training and still have to do the designs and make sure we put the parameters on there.
Yep. And we have to generate the right data for it to utilize.
Exactly.
And so, those parameters are spot on, John. That's critical to everything that is done.
It's so interesting to see the journey that you've taken too with Veritas. And when you look at some of that, what are some of the, I'd say, challenges that you've had from going from startup to now, a commercial enterprise and helping other companies?
Yeah, I think some of the challenges you face are being realistic with your clients of where you want to focus. I grew up in consulting. I worked in-house at a pharmaceutical company. I had the opportunity to do a vast range of work with a vast range of audiences on a vast range of topics. There's a lot that I can do. Just because I can do it doesn't mean I should do it. And oftentimes, you want to help the person in front of you who has a problem and wants to be helped. One of the challenges is focusing it down and saying, you know what, either I'm not the best person and maybe somebody so-and-so is better at this for you, or even just saying, it's not our focus. So that's a challenge. And at the same time, making sure you communicate that focus, right? When should you call me? That's a big one. I want to make sure we're known for something. The same challenge my clients have positioning their products, right? You would think I would be better at, but that's always been a challenge. Luckily, it's one I'm very conscious of and aware of. And so that's always a fun part of owning it because I have to practice what I preach. The other challenge I think that you face in this is just figuring out how to get all the parts and pieces that make this tick to come together and function like a well-oiled machine, right? That's a lot of hands-on involvement, right? A lot of quarterbacking, a lot of guidance, a lot of willingness to roll up your sleeves and get involved. And that's been a lot of fun because that's naturally who I am. That's not to say that the challenges haven't been there when a piece was missing, right? How do we figure out how to simulate all of these concepts in these various ways? That was not a light task. And so that's also been one of the challenges that has been fun because when we're focused, we can focus on the right ones to build. And so getting that focus and building toward that focus has always been the big challenge.
No, and I think that that's so true, right? And I really like, the fact of being clear, right, on what you do because, when you're working with your customers, being upfront and directing that, you can manage the expectations up front, right? So that they don't think, there's you're going to get a different deliverable. They're very clear on what you're doing for 'em.
Absolutely. You never want a mismatch of expectation. You never want a gotcha surprise. We'll take the insightful surprises, we do. But you want everyone on that path, whether they are in the day-to-day of the project or if they're just only going to read the final report's 3-slide executive summary. You always want them brought along and you want everyone on the same page about what they're going to receive, making sure it fits the need. Often, this is another challenge, is that deliverables can be commissioned in silos. What do I mean by that? Well, your market access team is trying to solve some type of market access problem or perceived market access problem. And so they commission work toward that problem while your HCP team does the same and your patient marketer is doing something else. Sometimes you got to step back, take that customer lens and say, well, let's validate where the problem actually is coming from. Is it really this stakeholder who's the problem? How did we know that? Why did we put it in the silo? Or maybe we actually need to open up that silo. And oftentimes we're encountering that as well.
Absolutely, especially with large organizations, right? You're going to run into that for sure.
Yes, absolutely.
One thing too, right, as we're kind of nearing the end of our session, one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, what is a topic that I should have asked you about that I haven't asked you yet that you'd like to share, especially with your work?
Yeah. I think one of the topics would be, how do you really know if you truly understand a customer's behavior? It's not going to be generalities. Sorry. Of perceptions. A physician can hold two conflicting things true at the same time. I can, on a 7-point scale, say I'm a 7. I want to treat as aggressively as possible to, keep the patient in remission. I also am a 7 when it comes to I want to treat as tolerably as possible so the patient doesn't have side effects. Well, your product is not both of those at the same time most of the time. And so, how do you know that you are actually affecting customer behavior? Well, there's a couple questions you can ask yourself. The first one is, do you know what initiated the behavior? The second one is, do you know the full range of alternatives for that behavior? And when I say that, I mean beyond just your competitor device or
Right.
medication. It could be no treatment. It could be wait and see, drag my feet. It could be go to the pharmacy and hear what the copay was and be like, right? So there's a whole range of behaviors, and each stakeholder has a different set, whether it's the physician, the patient, even the payers, and the different folks on the P&T committee. From there, you need to understand how those behaviors are built, what causes them to stay in place, what might be the underlying structures that they have developed for those behaviors to become instinctual. If you've mapped those, you're on a good path. If you haven't, there might be some blind spots that ought to be looked at before you get to market, before you put the effort and the time behind certain initiatives that you had in mind.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. Yeah, because those are the ones that can really blindside, right? Especially if something as simple as we mentioned earlier, patient compliance, right? If you haven't taken into account their behavior and needs, uh, you know, they may choose not to use the treatment.
Absolutely. It could be that and here's the thing is on the topic like patient compliance, often the physician assumes they were compliant. There is a void where the impact of a behavior is not being demonstrated to the other folks involved in this process. Do you know that void? That void is really hard to find because nobody's going to tell you it's there. How do you find it?
Yeah, that's great. That's a good point.
So yeah, that's topics and challenges like that are kind of an hour to hour view into my work day.
Absolutely.
Um,
Or right, I have to admit, this has been such a great discussion with you today. Is there anything else you really like to share, especially with the audience in terms of your experience or anything that you'd like to share about Veritas?
I would just say, one of the key things that drove Veritas would be our focus on making a difference. And it came out of a place of being disenchanted with the market research I grew up in to the point where, for a couple months, I thought I was going to leave the life sciences industry because I didn't feel like the impact that was being made was significant enough for the type of work that the market research was. And that's how highly I think of market research in the traditional sense. When you come back and you anchor on a real purpose of driving change in a way that is different, that has a true impact on people's lives, I think that's really motivating to get through one too many morning stand-up meetings, one too many internal conversations, one too many frustrating places where the team hasn't aligned yet. And to find that support, find the right folks who can help create the alignment to kind of keep you moving in a way that you're eventually going to be able to impact your marketplace the way you intended to.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Ray. It's been such a pleasure talking with you today. Definitely look forward to hopefully continuing the conversation again in the near future as you continue to help do great things for the industry.
Likewise. And John, thank you so much for the invite, for hosting this, for keeping topics like this on the minds of people working in this space. There's a lot for us to learn as a community from one another. And thank you for facilitating that, making that happen for everyone who listens in. And I appreciate you thinking of me and I hope we get to cross paths again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I appreciate the kind words. Have a good one.
Likewise.